The first veteran we meet is Jack Holder, a PBY air crewman who survived both Pearl Harbor and the Battle of Midway, and went on to fight numerous other battles in the Pacific and ultimately in Europe.
I arrived at Midway May the 31st. We began our search for the Japanese forces, and on the third day we found them, 600 miles moving towards Midway under a weather front. I happened to be in the second PBY search plane that spotted this armada. When the first plane found their position, we immediately flew to that position and seen the same thing. On June 4, I was airborne at 4 o'clock in the morning, armed with 4 500-pound bombs, and at 6:45, the Japanese forces struck Midway proper. Midway itself is not exactly a correct term. It should be the Midway Atoll. There's actually two small islands, 6 miles in diameter, 1,150 miles from Pearl Harbor. They destroyed the seaplane hangar on Eastern Island, the gallery, mess hall, radio station, and Sand Island actually has 3 runways. They destroyed 2 of them, but they left one, and we're sure they left it to use themselves for at a later time. For the first 2 hours, we were definitely losing the battle. In defense of Midway, the Marines had 27 Brewster fighter aircraft. 27 were dispatched, only 7 of them returned, and they were badly damaged. In addition to that, our torpedo planes attacking the Japanese forces were completely annihilated. The USS Hornet dispatched 30 TBDs, only 1 aircraft returned, Ensign Gay. They then sent out 15 additional torpedo planes, and only 4 of those returned. Out of 45 aircraft, we lost 40. But this was the time when the tide was about to turn. We had airborne 3 squadrons of SBD dive bombers led by Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey. They'd been airborne for 2 hours, running low on fuel. He decided to press on. And only moments later, he spotted the white wake of a fast-moving Japanese destroyer, and he says that ship has to be racing to rejoin the main forces. We're going to follow it. They did follow it, and only moments later, found 3 aircraft carriers. The Kaga, the Soryu, and the Akazi, which was the pride of the Japanese fleet. It was also Admiral Nugoma's flagship. And diving from 20,000 feet, they inflicted sufficient damage to sink all 3 carriers. However, they were aided by 2 things. Nagumo had received word that damage to Midway was slight. His plans were us to rearm with bombs and return and attack the island. Admiral Yamamoto said, no, we'll arm with torpedoes and go after the fleet. While they were changing from bombs to torpedoes, just when our dive bomber struck and did all the damage. Later in the day, Admiral Spruance called Admiral Nimitz. He says, Admiral, we've had a good day. We sank 3 carriers. Do you think that's enough? He said, hell no, I want the 4th one. And later on, they found the Hiryu and sunk it. They came to Midway with 4 carriers. We sunk all 4. Admiral Halsey said, if we had lost Midway and lost Guadalcanal, Except if we lost Midway, it would have prolonged the war by many months, and if we lost Midway and Guadalcanal, we could possibly have lost the war. And many historians have said that Midway was the greatest naval battle of all time. We had a good day. I flew 13 hours that day. Early in the afternoon, we found a submarine attempting to submerge. All hatches were closed. There was no one on deck. We made 2 passes over it. We dropped one 500-pounder near the fantail, dropped the second bomb near behind the conning tower. We made 6 circles around it. What's in the submarine sank. I think we had a good day.
I would say so.
Near sunset, we had lost all radio contact with Midway. We didn't know if we still held the island or the Japanese had it. We had 2 options. We could take a chance on returning to Midway, or we could sit down at sea and spend the night. We dropped our 2 remaining bombs, sat down at sea, drifted all night. I took a sleeping bag, climbed on top of the wing, tied myself to an antenna, and spent the night. Sunrise, we finally made contact with Midway. We learned we had held the island. And we were also told that there was a destroyer at the French frigate Shoals loaded with aviation fuel. We took navigational sunshots, found our position, flew to the shoals, refueled, and returned to Pearl Harbor.
That was quite an event.
It was an event I'll never forget, Jeff.
I bet.
PBY was one of the most important aircraft in World War II, a flying boat with extended range capable of carrying a heavy load. PBYs were used in anti-submarine warfare, patrol bombing, convoy escort, search and rescue missions, especially air-sea rescue, and cargo transport. It could operate from land with retractable wheels, or the wheels could be replaced with covers and it became a pure seaplane. Like all aircraft, it required regular maintenance. For radio man Ellis Skidmore, that became an issue at Midway. The base didn't have spare parts, so engine plugs that normally would be replaced every 60 hours had to work much longer, resulting in less power to the engines. It took a much longer run on the water to become airborne. But it turns out that wasn't all bad.
We did get the plane in the air that time, and then we was out 115 miles, and we picked up the Japanese battle cruisers, the Mogami and the Makuma. And I wanted to send a contact report, plain language. The Japanese knew they were going home, but nobody in the U.S. forces knew anything about these 2 battle cruisers, and I thought a plain language message right now to BB, haul and ask for home, would tell them where they were at. Patrol Plane Commander Carl Bauer says it's got to be encoded. So they encoded it, which was a long, drawn-out process.
Sure.
In the meantime, while they were encoding, a bomb burst just right ahead of the plane. I mean, just right ahead. It rocked the airplane. We tipped up, dived, turned the other way, and actually checked the plane. We didn't have any damage, but being the fact that we weren't cruising at the regular 100 miles an hour with the Japanese knew that the PBYs flew at, we were in between 1,000, 10,000, and 11,000 feet, as high as we could get, and we were flying at holding 82 knots rather than 100, and this difference of 18 miles an hour and the distance the ship was flying at us, I have figured it out, that gives us 108 feet. And if we had plugs in and new plugs, they'd have shot our airplane down when they first opened up fire. And the only reason they didn't shoot us down is because we weren't doing 100 knots.
The B-17 was another aircraft important to the war effort. For the Battle of Midway, the Army Air Corps flew some from Midway, but the long range of the B-17 also allowed missions to fly from Hawaii. James T. Murphy was a young second lieutenant fresh out of B-17 flight training in May 1942 when he was made pilot of the newest model, the B-17E, and ordered to Hawaii.
And so we then flew over to Hawaii and landed there and were assigned to an outlying airdrome still on Oahu in Hawaii and running reconnaissance out of there and trying to pick up the Japanese fleet that was coming into Midway. And so we did see a part of this Japanese fleet, and I think we were flying at about to go 24,000 feet, and we had anti-aircraft on our wings. It's the first time I'd ever seen anti-aircraft, and I'd never had anything fired at me in anger before, and this was it. And so that was a very interesting part. We didn't do any active bombing at all. Ours was purely reconnaissance, and that was what the Air Corps was doing in support of the Navy and the Marines in the Midway battle.
Was the anti-aircraft fire that you saw, were you able to identify kind of what was causing that, where it was coming
from? Yes, we could see I think there was one battleship that was trained in on us, and we immediately moved out of the way, I can assure you, got away from it, but I think it was a battleship that was firing at us. And we had seen 3 or 4 ships on the water down there. My crew had spotted them first, and then I did a very violent turn out of the way and to get out of the anti-aircraft, of course, and did get out of the anti-aircraft, but I saw for the first time what it looked like.
This was not friendly fire then?
We knew it wasn't. Okay.
In the video, Jack Holder misspoke on one point. Ensign George Gay of Torpedo Squadron 8 did not return with his aircraft. He was shot down, floated nearby, and watched other American aircraft sink the 3 Japanese carriers. He was later rescued after spending 30 hours in the water. Torpedo Squadron 8 was the first unit to engage the Japanese carriers at Midway, but their TBD Devastator torpedo bombers were no match for the Japanese Zeros. The squadron is remembered locally with Waldron Road, named after Commander John Waldron, the squadron's commanding officer, and NAS Corpus Christi's Waldron Field. The Flower Bluff High School Hornets draw their name from the USS Hornet, from which Torpedo Squadron 8 flew. Ensign Gay has long been recognized as the sole survivor of Torpedo Squadron 8. But there is another piece to the story, and 2 other survivors. In early 1942, some members of Torpedo Squadron 8 moved to the TBF-1 receiving detachment led by the squadron's executive officer. They received the new TBF Avenger torpedo bombers, destined to replace the TBD Devastator flown by the squadron. On May 29, 1942, they arrived in Hawaii with 19 of the Avengers, a day after the USS Hornet had sailed with VT-8 on board. 6 of the Avengers were fitted with belly tanks for extra fuel and flew to the Midway Atoll the next day, where they were designated Torpedo Squadron 8 Detached. This is the story of one of those pilots, Lieutenant Albert Ernest, as told to and recorded by his friend, Lieutenant F. Willard Robinson, who flew with Ernest later in the war.
There was a lot of tension and activity on the little sand island because everyone knew the attack by the Japanese was imminent. We didn't get a lot of sleep the night of June 4th and were out of our bunks long before daylight. A position report as to the location of the Japanese fleet had come in, and so we were prepared for takeoff. The 6 of us flew outbound just under the low clouds. I got sight of a flight of Japanese planes headed for Midway, but they were loaded for the attack and didn't bother us. We were lucky to be in the air, I thought, because I knew they would hit the island hard. It was a little over 160-mile flight to the Japanese carriers, and a lot of things happened that were not favorable for us. Because of the overcast, we had to go in without fighter cover, and this also hindered a coordinated attack between our torpedo and dive bombers. Somehow we got to the Japanese fleet before all of our planes arrived, so we just had to press on in alone or not go at all. That was not a viable choice. The Japs had anti-aircraft and something like 20 or 30 Zeros waiting to shoot us down, and that they did. There was no choice but to just try to fly on in and launch my torpedo. Bullets and anti-aircraft fire were coming at me from every direction. First, the elevator cables on the plane were severed, and I could not control my altitude up or down with a control stick. I launched the torpedo as best I could, and as I fought to keep the plane on course using the little auxiliary control tabs that could trim the plane up for straight and level flight, we kept taking bullets all the time, and the anti-aircraft fire from the ships was exploding all over the place. I couldn't jink anymore, and I couldn't corkscrew or take any kind of evasive action. I was just a tin duck in a shooting gallery. The air in the plane smelled like hot metal. A shell hit Manning, the turret gunner, and I could get no response from him, so I sensed he was dead, which he was. The tunnel gunner, Harry Ferrier, had taken a hit in the head and was fighting dazedly to remain conscious. Black bursts of 20mm shells continued to explode all around the plane, and some of the shrapnel hit the cockpit, shattering the whole instrument panel right in front of my face. One of the fragments hit me in the neck, and the blood gave me a real fright. But somehow my mind kept working. It was such a struggle to keep the plane flying level and on course that I lost some perspective as to where I was in relationship to the enemy ships. All of a sudden I realized that the anti-aircraft fire was no longer exploding in my face. It was on my tail. A couple of Zeros had swooped in to finish me off during my retreat, but I was so close to the water they couldn't make a real good run on me. By that time I was so tired I didn't really care much. It was all just a bad dream, and there wasn't much I could do anyway about the Zeros. Because all of my controls had been shot away, I could only struggle to fly on those tabs. The tabs are the things that control the settings of the rudder and the elevators. They are designed only to trim the airplane, not to maneuver it in flight. The Zeros didn't get me, although they made several more passes before they took off. They ran out of something, I don't know what, gas or bullets, or they attacked the dive bombers, which came in after we made the initial attack. I just wanted to go to sleep. I was so tired. The flight to get back to Midway was as nerve-wracking as the attack itself. It was tedious drudgery I shall never forget. I drove myself to keep my mind clear, and I knew this was the key to our survival. My compass had been shot out, and none of my instruments were operative. I could estimate by the sun the approximate direction to Midway. It was such a small little spot to find in the endless reaches of the Pacific. In about an hour I saw a column of billowing smoke and gradually made the slight adjustments in my course to take me in that direction. I guessed right. Some of the facilities and supply dumps on Midway had been set afire and were still burning from the early morning attack. I came straight into the bomb-pocked runway, as a normal approach was impossible. I waited until the last minute to lower the wheels, and when I hit the lever, it was apparent that only one wheel went down. The other wheel stayed stuck in the wheel well. I knew it would be a mess-up to land with one wheel up and the other wheel down, so I tried to raise the extended wheel. It wouldn't come up. The hydraulics had been shot up, and I crash-landed, you might say, and spun around on the one extended wheel. The crash wagon came speeding out and took the dead gunner and the wounded farrier from the plane. I looked over the damaged plane with some of the maintenance crew members who were stationed on Midway. We counted 147 bullet holes in the plane, and none of us could figure how that Avenger kept flying. This was one of the first 6 TBMs ever to be sent into battle, and the only one to make it back from that initial attack. Fate, in a positive way, was with me that day. Except for my part in the Battle of Midway, I was completely in the dark as to what really happened. I didn't know that the Hornet and the rest of my squadron, Torpedo 8, was even in the attack. Later that day, old friends from Dive Bombing Squadron 8 came off the Hornet, landed on Midway to refuel, but they didn't have too much information at that time. It was a day or two later that word began to trickle in, and I heard that my old flying buddies in Torpedo 8 had been wiped out. That was shocking news. I didn't hear until still later that Ensign George Gay had been shot down along with all the others in the squadron, but was later rescued by a PBY seaplane. So Gay and I were VT-8's only surviving pilots. My radio man, H.H. Ferrier, was the sole surviving air crewman. It had been a terrible day for torpedo pilots. Out of the 47 torpedo planes that attacked in that memorable 12 minutes, the Enterprise lost 10 of 14, the Hornet 15 out of 15, the Yorktown 10 out of 12. Not a single plane scored a verified hit, but they were largely instrumental in the day's victory.
The Avengers of VT-8 Detached are believed to have begun their attack a few minutes before Waldron's main squadron struck at 9:17 a.m., but their story has been less well known. After he was rescued, George Gay became national news and was toasted as the sole survivor of Torpedo Squadron 8. Ernest and Ferrier went on to tell those who'd ask, "Where are the other 2 sole survivors?" Bert Ernest had originally been commissioned as an Army second lieutenant. When the Army wouldn't let him fly, he transferred to the Navy. He was awarded 3 Navy Crosses during World War II, 3 Air Medals, and numerous other awards. Captain Bert Ernest retired from the Navy in July 1972. He passed away in October 2009. Lewis R. Hopkins retired from the Navy as a Rear Admiral, but he was a Green Ensign on December 7, 1941, and was soon ordered to report to Bombing Squadron 6 aboard the USS Enterprise, where the new squadron began intense training and gained valuable experience prior to heading for Midway.
So it was quite an experienced squadron. Had I think 3 lieutenants and 4 or 5 junior grades, and the rest of us were ensigns. Preponderance of us were ensigns insofar as numbers go. It's kind of interesting. As a matter of fact, I'm often asked to talk about the Battle of Midway, and there's been so much talk about the Battle of Midway and breaking of the code and all that sort of thing. And so I title my speech Ensigns at Midway, to kind of give it a little different flavor, you know. And I point out that, well, okay, we broke the code, and so Admiral Nimitz made a major decision, and Admiral Spruance and so forth. But somebody had to carry the bombs.
Exactly right.
And somebody had to drive, and so that's where the ensigns came in. And I think we had on the morning of June the 4th, there were 29 ensigns and not only our squad, there were 2 squadrons, the other squadron, and the 3 squadrons, Bombing Squadron 6, Scouting Squadron 6, and Bombing Squadron 3 did the damage. I mean, in 6 minutes. From 10:20 to 10:26. At 10:20, the ships had not been touched. Absolutely not. 10:26, 3 of them were headed for the briny deep, and the 4th one we got in the afternoon. But anyway, we went out on this mission, and we get to where they're supposed to be. They're not there. Nothing. I mean, you know, it's just ocean as far as you can see. And at this point in time, we were just about as far as we should be if we wanted to get back to the carrier.
What they call point of no return.
Point of no return. And Commander McCluskey, who pretty well known, and a lot is thought about the decision he made to go ahead and see if he could find them. And he went about another 15 minutes, and I knew, and most everybody else knew, we didn't have enough fuel to get back. You couldn't do it. So he turned northwest, and he ran across the story of Noah's Hole told many times. This one destroyer going hightailing it up, and so he decided to follow it. And so we, of course, in formation, we follow. And I mentioned how you can be impressed with an image. And I remember seeing the Japanese fleet. And I'm sitting here today, and I can see that Japanese fleet as clear as I saw it then. And it was something else, you know.
You were impressed.
I was impressed. Interestingly enough, at almost precisely the same time, coming from another direction, was Bombing Squadron 3, who had better information about the ship's location at the time they took off. And so we got there, and post-war analysis, the Japanese were amazed that you could coordinate an attack from almost 180 degrees and arrive at St. McLean luck.
That's it.
That was the amazing thing. There were no fighters. And there were no fighters until we got down. So we had, insofar as, you know, we had no resistance. Didn't even have any aircraft fire. They didn't see us. The Japanese side of this tells about people on the deck, and they don't see the SBDs until some of them are actually in their dive. And so they see at that point in time, of course, it's too late to do anything about it. Now, you go down about 60 to 70 degrees.
That was another question. Now,
And,
when you tipped over, what altitude were you when you started?
22,000.
You were at 22?
And so the plane, you got split flaps, and you get about 240 knots is the maximum speed with the split flaps.
That's all right.
And you have, in those days, you had what we call a gun sight, just a tube with a reticle in it and crosshairs and so forth. And so you look with your eye out there, and you look at it, and you put your crosshair. In the meantime, you're flying the plane. You got to keep it balanced, and so you're flying it. And as you go down, and I put the crosshairs on the leading edge of the carrier because the carrier's motion is going. And I guess I get to, and the radioman calls out the altitude, 5,000, 4,000, 3,000, 2,500, 2,000.
So you don't have to concentrate on that.
You can't. You're looking at this.
Right.
You can't see it. So he calls the altitude out, and he calls 2,500 and 0 coming from the right. That's the fighter plane.
Japanese.
But I go ahead and release the plane, and then of course I immediately turn into him in a defensive maneuver and so forth, and go on down and get right down on the water. I don't know, I think post-analysis shows I didn't get a hit, but usually if you don't have any other problems, you can drop your bomb and make a left turn and look back over your shoulder and see your bomb hit. Well, I didn't have that opportunity, so I had to.
You were busy.
I was busy. So I get down on the water as close as I can, and the Anderson, the gunner, says, "Let's get the hell out of here." I said, "What do you think I'm trying to do?" But anyway, we're basically in the middle of the Japanese fleet when we pull out. So then I get outside the fleet. Now the problem is, how do I get back to the ship, because the fuel And I was joined up by 2 other ensigns. That's my ensign story again. 2 other ensigns.
You
and
remember their name?
Yeah, Ensign Green and Ensign Ramsey. And we get about 40 miles out from the Enterprise, and Ensign Green runs out of fuel, and so he has to ditch. Nothing I can do but take note of where the location was. And we get within sight of the carrier, and Ensign Ramsey runs out of fuel. And I make a note of that. And so I get back to the carrier, and I'm one of 5 planes that gets back to the carrier. Now,
John Underwood was given a choice when he was caught running moonshine: federal time or military service. He lied that he was 17, he was 15, and got his mother to sign for him to enlist on October 27, 1941. 6 weeks of boot camp, and he had already reported to the USS Yorktown when Pearl Harbor was attacked. A plane pusher who helped move aircraft on the ship, Underwood went through the Battle of the Coral Sea and the quick repairs to the Yorktown before it sailed to Midway and back into battle.
Well, it was kind of a running battle. It started in the afternoon, and then we had general quarters, and then we had one wave of aircraft come over, and then the second wave came over, and that's when we got hit by the torpedo planes that were coming in.
Okay.
And actually, when we were on the flight deck anyway, we could see what was going on. I watched the Japanese airplanes come across our flight deck in the front.
Yeah. Okay.
And then there was one that come over and it lit right before it hit the tip of the torpedo plane. It just slight make the ship.
Okay.
But those gunners on there, they were really sharp. We had black smoke coming out of the sky all over.
Okay. Okay.
And when the bomb hit, there was one hit behind the superstructure and really did a lot of damage. And we went back to see what we could do back there, you know, but they had their fire crew and everything, and the fellows that were sitting there in those 1.1s, their bodies were just sheared off right in the back, so there was armor plating on the back of their feet, and their bodies were just sheared off the top of that.
Man, yeah.
And one of the landing cables, one of those snapped, and a couple of guys on the catwalk, when it snapped, it almost cut them in two.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it wasn't a pretty scene after that.
No.
The ship started to roll on to one side. And then they tried to get it underway, and it got underway for a little while. And then, but they couldn't keep the pressure up, so we were dead in the water again.
Okay.
So in that they said abandoned ship. So then we were, let's say, up on the flight deck with the other squadron members. One of the fellows there did not have a lighter there. We had one of those big K-pop lighters there. He didn't find one. So I was a good swimmer anyway, so I gave him mine. And I said, well, I know where another one is. So I went into the officer's ready room there, and where they had their May West. So I picked up one, and it had a leather flight helmet on it. So I just put the flight helmet on. I said, you know, just with a helmet on there, with the goggles, I said, I'll keep salt water out of my eyes.
Yeah.
So I took the May West and put it under my arm, and headed down to the hangar deck. And the slant of the ship was, it was 90-degree angle, I guess it was, too far from the lower side, and the ship was going off of the high side. So I decided to go down and see what was on the hangar deck.
Okay.
And when I went down from the ladder from the flight deck, came out right where my locker was, where our cruise quarters was.
Okay.
So one fellow stuck his head out of there, and I said, "Are there any water in those compartments?" He said, "No." So my locker was just down at the foot of the stairs, and well, I had my watch and I had my poker winnings down there.
Okay.
And so I went down to my locker and opened my locker and got my money out and got my watch and ring out, and then I went back up on the hangar deck and went down to the lower side and just put the May West on and jumped off the water and just started swimming away from the ship. So I I was way on the other side of the ship, so I went around to the bow of it, and here I'm out there all by myself. You could see the ship. It was, I don't know, it was 200 yards away, I guess.
Oh.
And I was just drifting further away. So then they had another general alarm. I could hear the destroyers that were by there. They were circling there. So then I looked at the back, saw some aircraft on there. So I took that yellow May West and stuck it between my legs and just bent down and put the goggles to that helmet over my eyes, and I just stuck down under the water. And then on about 30, 45 minutes, why there was a destroyer over on the other side. So I started swimming towards that and holding the May West up and shaking my fingers at it. So it turned and came back, or wide surface came back, and one of the fellows on the destroyer, I don't know who he was, he jumped off, dove off the back of the destroyer and swam over to with a line he had around him and tied that around me, and then they pulled me in.
Okay. Good.
We close with a local veteran, Marvin Alexander. Marvin, a Pearl Harbor veteran, was a plane captain on a PBY. These short clips are from an interview he did recently.
On our way to Pearl Harbor, from Pearl Harbor to Midway, we lost about 8,000 feet. We were in a wind shear, and we just dropped. He had the yoke in his lap, and we still couldn't get it. The airplane to do what he was trying to do. And we get there, and they had bombed the island and tore up the provisions. We had spam and lima beans to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So I don't eat spam or lima beans today. It was a rough 5 days. We flew 10 to 12 hours a day, every day for 5, 6 days. I wanted to rode the saddle, what they call the saddle, which is between the wings and the fuselage. We had you climbed up in it, you sit down, and that was the position I had to, because I was controlling the gas flow to the engines. While we were flying patrol, we were looking for the Japanese fleet. We found them close to the Turk Islands. They were good aviators. And we got out right on the water, 50 feet off the water, and flew a zigzag pattern where they couldn't hit us. If they dive bombers, but they'd go right into the water if they didn't pull up quick enough. So we were right on the water. They were shooting at us. No, we had 50 caliber machine guns mounted in the turrets, which was the blisters on the side of there. Well, that's all we had to defend ourselves. All right. Till this day, I don't like to talk about it. We were just doing our job. You did what they asked you to do. They're doing their job, just like we were. Our pastime on Midway Island was watching the goody birds. They were fun to watch. They had to run downhill to get airborne. So without a hill, they couldn't get airborne.
After Midway and other campaigns in the Pacific, Marvin, his wife, and young sons were transferred to NAS Corpus Christi, where he was an instructor and a supply officer. Marvin served 13 years in the Navy and settled in Corpus Christi, where he became a businessman and raised his family.
Well, I had a good run in the military, so I can't see anything negative about it.